So blitzscaling is very important right now because all around the world, people are worried about the economy, about stock markets, about all of these things. The how is to prioritize speed over efficiency. If you are the first to achieve scale, you're going to win that market and be the market leader more or less permanently.
The Secret Sauce
สวัสดีครับผมเคนนครินทร์และนี่คือ The Secret Sauce
What's your secret
สำหรับแฟนๆรายการ The Secret Sauce นะครับที่ฟังหรือว่าชมผ่านทุกช่องทางของเราแล้วอยากเรียนรู้เรื่อง Blitzscaling ให้ลึกซึ้งไปอีกขั้นครับต้องบอกว่าทาง Rise ครับได้จัดกิจกรรม Exclusive 2 วันครับเป็น Master Class ที่จะพาคุณไปเจาะกลยุทธ์ Blitzscaling ที่บริษัทชั้นนำในซิลิคอนวัลเลย์นะครับไม่ว่าจะเป็น Airbnb, Tencent, Facebook, Spotify และอีกมากมายในแวดวงเทคโนโลยีใช้ในการขยายธุรกิจได้อย่างรวดเร็วภายในระยะเวลาอันสั้นได้สำเร็จนะครับผู้เชี่ยวชาญที่บินตรงมาสอนด้วยตัวเองเลยครับที่กรุงเทพมหานครเลยก็คือคนที่ผมสัมภาษณ์นะครับคุณคริสเยนะครับผู้ร่วมเขียนหนังสือ Blitzscaling และคุณเจฟแอบบอตครับผู้ร่วมก่อตั้ง Blitzscaling Academy และผู้บริหารกองทุน Blitzscaling Venture ครับแล้วก็ช่วงพิเศษครับ Ask Me Anything ฮะในรูปแบบไลฟ์ออนไลน์กับโอ้โหคนนี้ต้องบอกว่าเป็นบุคคลที่ผมอยากฟังมานานแล้วอยากถามนะคุณรีดฮอฟแมนครับผู้ร่วมก่อตั้ง LinkedIn ครับแล้วก็ผู้นิยามกลยุทธ์ Blitzscaling และผู้บริหารของกองทุนชื่อดังอย่าง Greylock Partners นะครับแล้วก็คนนี้ยังเป็นเจ้าของพอดแคสต์ที่ผมชื่นชอบมากๆนะครับก็คือ Master of Scale งานจัดขึ้นวันที่ 30-31 สิงหาคม 2565 ครับศึกษารายละเอียดเพิ่มเติมได้ทางลิงก์ที่ปักหมุดไว้ในคอมเมนต์แรกนะครับพิเศษครับสำหรับผู้ที่ติดตาม The Secret Sauce เพียงกรอกหรือว่าแจ้งโค้ด The Secret Sauce ครับรับส่วนลดสูงถึง 20,000 บาทเหลือเพียง 130,000 บาทจากราคาปกติ 150,000 บาทครับ Blitzscaling โตเร็วแบบสายฟ้าฟาดเร็วดุดนรกคืออะไรแล้วเราจะมาปรับใช้กับธุรกิจของเราได้อย่างไรทุกท่านเคยได้ยินคำว่า Blitzscaling ไหมครับคำว่า scale ก็คือการขยายธุรกิจใช่ไหมครับการเติบโตส่วนใหญ่แล้วก็จะมีคำว่า fast scale หรือว่าวิธีการในการเติบโตที่รวดเร็วแต่มันมีคำหนึ่งคือ Blitzscaling จริงๆแล้วต้องบอกว่าเป็นหนังสือที่ได้รับความนิยมมากในช่วง 2-3 ปีที่ผ่านมานะครับก็เขียนโดยคุณริช ฮอฟแมนซึ่งเป็นหนึ่งในผู้ก่อตั้ง LinkedIn เนาะแล้วก็คุณคริสเยนะครับต้องบอกว่าหนังสือเล่มนี้ผมบังเอิญได้อ่านอยู่บ้างนะฮะเป็นคอนเซปต์ต่างๆตอนนั้นก็รู้สึกว่ามันคืออะไรกันแน่การที่เราจะเติบโตเร็วแบบก้าวกระโดดโดยที่บางทีไม่ต้องสนใจ efficiency ไม่ต้องสนใจเรื่องกฎกติกาอะไรต่างๆเนี่ยมันใช้ได้จริงหรือเปล่าเพราะว่าในโลกปัจจุบันเราจะเห็นเลยว่ามันมีอีกด้านหนึ่งของเหรียญเนาะการโตแบบรวดเร็วหรือในตลาดบางตลาดมันเหมาะจริงหรือเปล่าเพราะว่าผู้เขียนหนังสือเนี่ยอยู่ในแวดวงสตาร์ทอัพแล้วเขาก็ทำการสำรวจบริษัทที่สามารถ Blitzscale ได้ก็คือโตอย่างรวดเร็วและประสบความสำเร็จนะครับไม่ว่าจะเป็น Amazon Facebook Airbnb นะครับสิ่งต่างๆที่เกิดขึ้นเหล่านี้แล้วถอดมาเป็น playbook ถอดมาเป็นบทเรียนให้กับพวกเราแต่ว่าในบริบทปัจจุบันต้องบอกว่าพอมัน 2022 เนี่ยมันก็มีหลายคำถามที่น่าสนใจผมมีโอกาสได้พูดคุยครับต้องบอกว่าตัวจริงเสียงจริงครับกับคนที่เขียนหนังสือเล่มนี้นะครับคุณคริสเยนะครับคริสเยเป็นบุคคลที่อยู่ในแวดวงสตาร์ทอัพมานานนะครับเป็นคนทำ Academy เรื่อง Blitzscaling เป็นทำเกี่ยวข้องกับการเทรนคนนะครับให้คำปรึกษาสตาร์ทอัพมากมายเพราะฉะนั้นตัวจริงเสียงจริงอยู่ที่พาโลอัลโตนะครับมีโอกาสได้พูดคุยกันพอดีว่าคุณคริสเยเนี่ยเขาจะมาที่เมืองไทยนะครับช่วงปลายเดือนสิงหาคมมาทำเวิร์กช็อปให้กับคนไทยนี่แหละครับได้เข้าใจ principle หรือ strategy เรื่อง Blitzscaling นะครับซึ่งเชิญมาโดยทาง Rise Academy นะครับใครสนใจก็ลองไปดูได้นะครับต้องบอกว่าเป็นโอกาสที่เราเห็นไม่บ่อยนักนะครับบทสนทนาที่วันนี้จะคุยกันก็จะคุยกันเรื่อง Blitzscaling ซึ่งแน่นอนเราจะปูพื้นฐานกันมันคืออะไรมันแตกต่างจากกลยุทธ์ปกติยังไงข้อควรระวังคืออะไรมันเหมาะกับทุกคนจริงหรือเปล่าแต่ว่าสิ่งที่ผมชอบมากกว่านั้นก็คือเนื่องจากเจอตัวจริงเสียงจริงในวงการนะก็เลยได้คุยกับคนที่อยู่ในริงไซด์เลยเรื่องของคริปโตเคอเรนซีเขามองยังไงในตอนนี้ Web3 ที่มันไฮป์มากๆเลยเขามองยังไงกับเรื่อง Metaverse นะครับหรือเขามองยังไงกับเรื่อง Recession เขามองยังไงว่าตอนนี้สตาร์ทอัพหลายสตาร์ทอัพหรือว่าบริษัทเทคโนโลยีเนี่ยปลดคนงานออกค่อนข้างเยอะหรือฟรีซคนเอาไว้เพื่อรับมือกับสภาวะถดถอยแล้วเราจะมาปรับใช้ยังไงได้บ้างเดี๋ยวลองไปฟังดูนะครับ Okay, hi Chris. So first of all, could you introduce yourself a bit to Thai audience?
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Ye and I am the co-author of Blitzscaling, which is the book I wrote with my friend Reid Hoffman. I'm also one of the co-founders of Blitzscaling Ventures, which invests in blitzscaling companies, and the Blitzscaling Academy, which helps companies all over the world, whether they're startups or large corporations, apply the lessons of blitzscaling.
Yeah, what are you up to these days?
Well, a lot of things. Obviously, traveling to Bangkok is one of them. That's one of the main things I do, which is travel around the world and spread the word about blitzscaling. But the other main thing I do is try to help great entrepreneurs. I'm a big believer in the power of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are taking on a lot of risk. They're doing very difficult work, and I try to support them as an investor, as an advisor, and as an educator.
Right. So you are the co-author of one of the, best business book in recent years, Blitzscaling. And so what exactly is Blitzscaling?
So we have a specific definition of blitzscaling that we use in the book, and then there's what it really means for entrepreneurs. The definition in the book is that it's the pursuit of rapid growth by prioritizing speed over efficiency in the face of uncertainty. And the reason we define it that way is because everyone always wants the pursuit of rapid growth. That was something that came up during the original dot-com boom. People said to get big fast. That's the pursuit of rapid growth. But the question is, how do you pursue that rapid growth and why? The how is to prioritize speed over efficiency, because when you're trying to grow as quickly as possible, you cannot always be as efficient as you would be if you're going at a slower pace. But then the question becomes, well, why would you try to grow so quickly? And that's the part that's not as prominent in the book, but really is the heart of the matter for entrepreneurs, which is when you're going after a winner-take-most market. That is a market where if you are the first to achieve scale, you're going to win that market and be the market leader more or less permanently. That's the reason you blitzscale. It's worth taking on risk if you can win the market and then be a vastly profitable company for decades.
Right. So I will ask you a very simple question. Why blitzscaling is important right now?
So blitzscaling is very important right now because all around the world, people are worried about the economy, about stock markets, about all of these things. And the natural reaction we have under those circumstances is to pull back, to take on less risk. And there's no question that in an environment where it's harder to find financing, where customers are more reluctant to open their wallets, you should take on less risk. But it's still important to take on risk because taking on intelligent risk is the way you beat your competitors. And so the story of blitzscaling is really important right now because it is during these times when the economy doesn't look so hot that many of the great companies are started. If we think back to, for example, LinkedIn, my co-author Reid Hoffman started LinkedIn after the dot-com bust when everyone thought there was no reason to be on the internet. And he was able to create LinkedIn, and eventually the company was sold to Microsoft for $26 billion. One of the companies he invested in was Facebook, which again also took place during that same time frame and obviously became enormously valuable. When Reid became a venture capitalist, his first investment, which happened right after the economic crisis, the big subprime mortgage crisis and global recession, was Airbnb, which grew enormously and is one of the world's most valuable companies today. So it is during these difficult times that entrepreneurs can find the opportunities to really grow great companies. It's hard. There's a lot of challenge, but the potential opportunity, especially as the economy improves, is enormous.
Right. So does blitzscaling apply to all entrepreneurs? So can we choose not to blitzscale?
Absolutely. In fact, blitzscaling only applies to a minority of entrepreneurs. That's because in order for blitzscaling to make sense, you need to have a winner-take-most market, and you need to have a clear way to beat your competition, some sort of advantage in distribution that allows you to grow faster than they do. Because you can imagine, even if there's a winner-take-most market, if nobody has a distribution advantage, there might be 5 or 6 companies all fighting it out. And in the end, nobody wins. So you want to find that market which is really valuable and where you have an advantage. If you have those things, then it's great to take on that additional risk. But if you don't have those things, it can be very dangerous. So for example, one of the companies that tried to blitzscale perhaps the most was WeWork. And WeWork spent billions and billions of dollars growing rapidly. But they didn't have a winner-take-most market. If WeWork expands and grows, There's no reason why I'm going to choose to use WeWork instead of any other co-working space. And WeWork can't have a monopoly on office space. Every building WeWork has, there's a building to the left and a building to the right are probably just as good. And so they were spending money to grow, but there wasn't a reason. There was no way for them to win the market permanently.
So how should we know that in my market, it's winner takes all or not?
So here is the key thing, especially in the technology industry, and most of us are here in the technology industry, it really comes down to network effects. And so what a network effect is as you increase the number of nodes in the network, so users or customers or what have you, then the value per user increases. So if you think about something like a Facebook, each additional user makes Facebook more valuable for all the other users. If you think about something like a WhatsApp or a WeChat, same thing. There are also two-sided network effects. If you look at Airbnb, each additional host on the platform improves the value for all the guests because there are more places where they can stay. And each additional guest improves the value of the platform for the hosts because it's more likely they're going to be able to rent out their house or apartment. So as that network value increases, it does two things. The first is by increasing the value per user and increasing the number of users, you're getting exponential value growth. So these companies become very valuable very quickly. But the other thing is, as the network grows, the value of the network is so large that even if somebody comes in and has a competing product, maybe even offers that product up for free, they don't get any traction because they don't have the network. It's like, imagine if somebody said, I have a website, it's just like Airbnb, except there are no houses listed. I would say, well, I'm not going to bother using that. I don't care what you're telling me. This is not useful to me.
Right. So apart from tech industry, outside the tech industry, is it possible to apply Blitzscaling to, any industry or region or in Thailand?
Absolutely. So Blitzscaling is something that is, as I'd like to put it, relative and contextual. So a lot of people think that Blitzscaling only works in startups because that's where the fastest growth is. But Blitzscaling is really a competitive strategy. It's a question of, in this particular kind of market, can I beat the competition? And in other markets that are outside of, say, the internet, the growth may be slower. But as long as you're moving faster than the competition and improving your competitive position, you might still be Blitzscaling. In the book, we talk about all sorts of different industries. There are people who have blitzscaled in apparel and clothing. There are people that have blitzscaled in food and beverage. So there's all sorts of ways to do this. And as long as you are moving faster than the competition and your scale is giving you a significant competitive advantage, you can potentially apply the lessons of blitzscaling.
Right. So how to blitzscale? How do we do blitzscaling?
Well, the most important thing is to first assess your market and make sure you have that winner take most market. The next step after that is to really develop your go-to-market strategy. It really is all about figuring out, how am I going to grow faster than the competition? Now, during the early stages of your company, you're also really looking carefully at the concept of product market fit. Because the thing is, product market fit is what determines whether or not your product is actually being usable and used by the customers. And if you begin to grow rapidly before you've figured out product market fit, all it means is that it's going to be even more painful later on because you'll end up losing those customers. So the early stages, figure out that winner take most market, work on that product, get that product market fit in place, and then go, go, go.
Yeah, but how to find perfect product market fit? It's very difficult,
It is extremely difficult, but there are certain things that I always tell entrepreneurs to do, and I think this is part of the secret. So when it comes to product market fit, you have to be looking at the right information. The way to tell whether or not you have product market fit is based on metrics. Now, the best metric, of course, is does your customer return year after year and pay you money? That's the best metric. That's ultimately what you want because that determines the value of your company. But that's a trailing indicator. It takes a long time for that to be the case. You only find out after a year if they're going to stay with you. And you just can't iterate your product fast enough to get it to product market fit if you're taking 1-year cycles. So what you need is a leading indicator, something that tells you, is this the product that people are going to use and keep using? And that's where I tell people to look for the frequency and intensity of usage. The frequency of usage means how often do they use it? And the intensity of usage is, okay, how long do they use it and how important is it to them? because only if the product is something that's used regularly and intensively is it going to be something that is going to be valuable. Now, the other thing about product market fit is, in addition to that frequency and intensity of usage, what you're then going to look for is, over time, that retention. And so it will be something that, as your company grows, as you add users, measuring retention is going to be essential. So you have to invest in metrics, you have to invest in analytics, because that's what your investors are going to be looking for.
Yeah, right. After product market fit, what's next? What is the key factor to Blitzscale?
So once you've got the product market fit, it all boils down to, can you scale more efficiently in terms of customer acquisition? Customer acquisition is essential. And the key way to scale effectively with customer acquisition is not just figure out how to spend money more effectively, because everyone can spend money. But what you want to do is you want to figure out, is there a way for me to design virality into my product so that as people use the product, they're bringing in new users? Sometimes that's organic, right? If you take something like a Dropbox, for example, with Dropbox, if you share your files with other people, they naturally create Dropbox accounts for themselves. So that's a natural virality. But there's also incentivized virality. So with Dropbox, if you refer your friends and they create Dropbox accounts, they get more free storage and you get more free storage. So that incentive also helps to drive that virality. And so to the extent that you can find a way to get the virality built in, that's how you grow.
I read from in your book, you mentioned about the 4 key growth factors for Blitzscaling. So can you explain more about this?
Absolutely. So the 4 key growth factors of Blitzscaling are the things that power your growth. And we've talked a little bit about them, but I'll mention some of the other ones. So we've talked about, you need that winner take most market. You have to have those network effects in place. But we've also talked about the importance of your distribution strategy. Are you able to go to market more effectively? But there's 2 other really important things that need to be in place. The first is you need to have a big market. Taking on the risk of blitzscaling is only worth it if there's going to be a big reward, because that's how you make it make sense. The risk has to provide a big reward. And so you need a big market. Now, it doesn't have to be a big market today. Sometimes it's a market that will grow over time. So when companies start getting into ride hailing, at first that market seemed to be very small because the market for taxis was a certain size. And people didn't think it would necessarily grow bigger. But having a better product meant that that market actually expanded dramatically. We all use ride hailing so much more often than we use taxis. That's an example of how the market can expand over time. The fourth and final growth factor is the gross margin. It's still important. People often think blitzscaling means you don't have to make money, you can lose as much money as you want. That's not true. Gross margin still matters. You still ultimately are judged on your ability to build a profitable business. However, you don't have to be profitable immediately. What I always tell people is there's different kinds of value you create. You can create financial value and you can create strategic value. Financial value is very easy to measure. People can just look at it and public companies will report their earnings. That's all financial value. But then there's strategic value, right? If a company's earnings are lower because it is investing in new technologies, but those new technologies are creating products that mean that their competitors can't possibly compete, they're converting financial value into strategic value. So blitzscaling is all about how can you create that strategic value so that eventually the gross margins will be there. Now, for a blitzscaling company, the ideal is software gross margins. So gross margins that are 70, 80, even 90% plus gross margins. But you can successfully blitzscale as long as your gross margins are the same as or better than your competitors. So you may be in a low margin industry, but if you're better than your competitors on gross margins, you can still potentially blitzscale.
Okay, so there are many stages of blitzscaling, right? So,
Yes.
When should we blitzscale, or how should we know that what stage are we now?
Yes. So when we talk about blitzscaling, we talk about the different sizes of company. Each stage represents a different size, from the family to the tribe to the village to the city to the nation. And it's basically a power of 10. A family is less than 10. A tribe is less than 100, a village is less than 1,000, a city is less than 10,000, a nation is 10,000 and up. So those are the stages, but that's a description of the company. What you're asking for is the prescription. How do you know when to blitzscale? So that decision is usually happening at that family or tribe stage very early on. What you're trying to do is you're trying to really prove out your assumptions about the market, about the size of the market, about the nature of the product that's required to capture the market. And during that early stage, you actually do want to be efficient, because what you want to do is you want to have enough time to be able to figure out the answers. And the name of the game is figuring out, how do I learn as cheaply and quickly as possible? And the goal should be, let's figure out this market, and then let's also establish product market fit. Like, that's the ideal. Establish product market fit, then blitzscale. However, there are times when you may be forced to grow sooner than you would like. And that's based on the competition. Because as you remember, it's a winner-take-most market. That means that somebody else could win it too. So if you have competitors who realize that this is a winner-take-most market and they begin to grow before you do, the risk is they achieve critical scale, and then it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how efficient you were. So you always have to have a very keen eye out for the competition and react quickly. If they start to go, then you have to go right with them. It's like running a race. If you see someone jump off the starting blocks and start sprinting, you better start sprinting as well. If you wait until they're halfway around the track, you're never going to catch up with them.
You talk about risk. So is blitzscaling a risky strategy? What is the side effects?
So it's an incredibly risky strategy, because you are sacrificing efficiency. You are spending more money. And all of these things increase the risk. The reason it makes sense to take on that additional risk is the even bigger existential risk is that somebody else gets to the finish line first. If you get, as I mentioned, if somebody else wins the market, then you've lost by definition, no matter what else you do. And so blitzscaling helps reduce that risk at the cost of increasing certain other risks. The side effects of blitzscaling are pretty straightforward. As a founder or entrepreneur, you're going to be working harder than you ever imagined. It's going to be enormously stressful. The people around you are going to be stressed out. Your organization is going to be growing very quickly, and people are going to feel like it's out of control. These are all unpleasant things. But do you know what's even more unpleasant? Losing.
So how do you describe the tech industry right now? The market is not quite good, right? Layoff, hyperinflation, and a lot of problems here. Headline. So how do you describe?
Yes, so there's no question that this is a challenging market. Now, I'll preface that by saying that if I were able to accurately predict the macroeconomic situation in the world, I wouldn't bother being a venture capitalist. I would just be the world's most successful hedge fund investor. But what I do see is this: with hyperinflation going on, with high energy costs going on, with disruptions to the global supply chain, there is more risk than before. And markets are moved by human psychology. When people feel like there's danger and uncertainty, then natural reaction is to be more defensive, to take fewer chances. And so that is what is affecting the markets right now. Now, I'm not as worried about the big companies doing hiring freezes or laying people off, because frankly, they had hired too many people. They'd gone on these crazy hiring binges. And these companies like Facebook had just hired enormous numbers of people. It may have been easier for them because, unlike in the past, because of the pandemic, they weren't constrained by office capacity. They could hire as many people as they wanted. And they probably went a little crazy. So now we're seeing the after effects. People are retrenching. People are maybe even laying off folks. But in most cases, they're laying off people who maybe they shouldn't have hired to begin with. And the markets for labor are still pretty hot. People can still find jobs relatively easily. So I will say, again, I am not an expert on the global macro environment. I do think it is likely that things are going to get worse, because with inflation, we know there's one way to beat inflation. That's to raise the interest rates and cool down the economy. And a recession is a feature, not a bug, right? The idea of setting the economy and slowing it down so that inflation will be killed off, that's a recession. And so I do think it's likely we will see a recession at some point in time. But by the way, recessions don't affect every industry equally. The dot-com bust in the early 2000s affected the technology industry more than the rest of the world. The subprime mortgage crisis affected the technology industry less than the rest of the world. It's still an open question what's going to happen with this one. If I were to make a prediction, I would say there's going to be more of a bust in areas like Web3, which were more speculative, and less of a recession in areas where there are still products that consumers want to get that are affordable enough for them. The consumers are still not feeling poor. So I think there's still plenty of chances to build great companies.
Oh, interesting. You have seen a lot of crisis, as you mentioned about subprime, dot-com boom, and we are here in recession and pandemic, right? So what is your playbook to overcome this crisis and find the opportunity during crisis?
Excellent question. So the most important part of the playbook is to optimize for adaptability. So it's all about adaptability because we are in uncharted waters. With the pandemic, nobody had dealt with it before. And so what I told people is the answer is not to turtle up and just, close yourself off and wait for it to blow over, but rather instead to say, what can I do to adapt to the situation more quickly? And one of the things I actually told people at the beginning of the pandemic is, this pandemic surprised all of us. We should have seen it coming. There were news reports, there were all these things happening, but nobody wanted to believe it. Everyone wanted to believe it was going to be okay. And so many of us were caught flat-footed, and we should have known earlier than we did. But the similar thing happens out the other end, right? As we get vaccines and we're able to get vaccinated and we're able to return to many kinds of normal business, a lot of companies maybe had found themselves short of staff and resources. Like the airline industry as a whole found itself without enough planes, without enough pilots. And that's why many of us who've traveled over this summer have seen the delays and the cancellations and the other problems. So the thing I would say is focus on that adaptability. Be not just cautious, but be aggressive once you've determined which way things are going. So when you have said, okay, this is the new reality, move aggressively in that direction rather than saying, oh, I'm just going to take it slow.
I think that the important question is which way to go, right?
Yes.
I know you are not the futurist, but you have seen a lot of startups. So I think you should know the way to go. What are the key emerging trends or the future that you try to go?
So I think that broadly speaking, there continues to be the digitization of the entire world, right? So many industries had been left largely untouched, and technology is transforming all of them. So I think that especially for those of you who are working on the enterprise side, who are working in industries that had previously not been as transformed, this is a great opportunity and a great time. I think the other piece of advice that I give to all entrepreneurs is to make sure they consider what the end user or customer is experiencing. I think it's far too easy for us to get caught up in and believe in, we have this great idea, it sounds wonderful on paper, and we don't actually see what the customers or consumers who are trying it out actually think of the product. Because at the end of the day, they're making individual decisions as to whether or not to buy or whether or not to use your product. And staying close to the customers by doing research, maybe doing user tests, going out and seeing them in person, all that remains really important because that's going to tell you what do you need to do in order to build a product that really resonates with them.
Yeah, your answer remind me about TikTok and Facebook. I have seen phenomenon about TikTok in the recent years, right? And I think Facebook, our Meta company, try to adapt to consumer behavior. So what have you learned about this?
So TikTok is an absolutely fascinating case. And it's a great illustration of how you can build a new business without necessarily having to take on the existing player head to head. So Facebook built its business around the notion of we have a network of people who are following each other, and that network graph is what is valuable. And what TikTok did is they did something completely different. They said instead, what really matters is understanding the interest graph. What do people find interesting? Where do they direct their attention? And in many ways, the success of TikTok reveals that ultimately it was always the interest or attention graph that was the most important. The network graph was just the indirect way of getting to the attention graph, because the assumption was we would pay more attention to people that we already knew or people that were important to us. And TikTok also illustrates how a lot of people said, oh, how are you ever going to build a new social network? Facebook is so dominant, it takes over everything. I'm like, this is the history of the technology industry. Once upon a time, people said, how can any company ever beat IBM? Then people said, how can any company ever beat Microsoft? And then they said, how can any company ever beat Facebook? And so on and so forth. The answer is that those companies don't lose their monopolies. IBM is still incredibly dominant in mainframe computers. It's just that we've moved on to new technologies and new product categories. Microsoft is still dominant in desktop operating systems and the Office suite. And but Microsoft would not be where it is today if they didn't also realize that the Azure cloud computing business was important. Like that's what's driving their value now. And Facebook, again, they have their core business with the Facebook brand, but they're trying to progress with Meta into the metaverse. And meanwhile, they still need to make sure that Instagram and WhatsApp are successful because these are the growing portions of their network.
What do you think about metaverse? We talk a lot about metaverse, but I've never seen the real case or use case. What do you think about metaverse?
So the metaverse is one of the things like nuclear fusion, which is always 5 years away, always just around the corner, promises to transform everything. And someday it will. But has that day arrived yet? Well, what I would say is, think of the advice I gave earlier. Go look at the individual users and customers and see what their behavior is. I have been to a couple of metaverse events. They're horrible, absolutely horrible. They're
horrible.
They're worse than doing, a traditional Zoom or something like that. Because what am I doing? I'm walking through this metaverse in order to then open up a Zoom window. Come on, this is absurd. Now, there is a place where the metaverse works, and that is video gaming. And that's why things like Roblox and Minecraft and Warcraft and other crafts are still very powerful. And if I were going to go into the metaverse business, I would very strongly focus on the video game industry and their proven ability to create compelling experiences. This is probably one of the reasons why Microsoft is buying Activision. So that's where I would look for in the metaverse. I'm like, okay, when we can make 3D virtual reality games work, then we can start thinking about 3D virtual reality offices and conferences and everything else.
Yeah. So you let me think about cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's the same situation. People talk a lot about and try to speculate, and this is crazy right now. So this year is a bear market, right? It's not a good year, and everybody crazy about this event. Celsius in Thailand, we have awful event as well, if you know that. So what do you think about this?
So I think in the cryptocurrency realm, I mean, there's two things, and we should separate cryptocurrency from Web3 as well. In the cryptocurrency world, there are two real things that are going on. One is, can the cryptocurrency provide utility? And the other is, do we believe that it makes sense to allow speculation in cryptocurrencies? And if you look at the original Bitcoin sort of writing, it's really focused on more of the speculation. Bitcoin was intended as a store of value. It was never particularly well designed to be a transaction medium. Of course, the idea was we could use it for transactions, but it's proven to not be particularly effective for that. The same is true for Ethereum even, with the virtual machines and the gas fees and everything else. And so as a result, I think everyone's focused on the speculation side. I do think that their potential for cryptocurrency is, let's take out the speculation. Can cryptocurrency do a better job than the Visa network or MasterCard network or transactions? Can it do a better job of enabling micropayments and things like that? There's projects like the Bitcoin Lightning Network that are trying to do things along those lines, as well as other layer 1 chains and layer 2 chains even, and things like that. But it always boils down to, does it actually do something better? And it better do something a lot better than the existing way of doing things. For too long, people have sprinkled Web3 on everything with the notion that the speculation and the speculative fever would allow them to raise money. And they were right, but eventually they would have to deliver if they weren't smart enough to sell to someone first. And so that's what we're seeing happen right now. And people sometimes say, well, there have been previous crypto crashes before, and, why would this be any different? And the industry just went bigger and bigger from there. And I said, all those previous crashes took place when there were fewer and fewer people who were even aware of what cryptocurrency was. And so the crash occurred, but there was always a crop of new people who had never even thought of cryptocurrencies before that people could get into the system. This time, too many people have already speculated and touched cryptocurrencies. There's not a giant supply of 100 times as many people out there who haven't heard of cryptocurrencies. Everyone's heard of it. And so it has to be something. You can no longer ride the speculative cycle. There has to be utility. There has to be some way in which it's actually better than non-crypto ways of doing things.
Oh, good point. So do you invest in cryptocurrency?
I have a small amount of money in cryptocurrencies. That is because I believe that makes sense, given that I am not smart enough to know how everything's going to work, that I should own at least a little bit of it. But I think that that's the appropriate thing. Put a little bit of it. The tragedy is we saw people with things like Terra and some of these other supposedly safe, high-yield products lose their life savings. And they said, oh, this is a stable coin. It's safe. There's no risk. I'm like, there's always risk. You cannot jump into a completely unregulated market and expect it's going to be as safe as a regulated market. That has proven to be a lie.
Okay, but do you still believe in cryptocurrency world?
I think that cryptocurrency will still have a role in cross-border transactions. I think it will have a role in areas where they don't necessarily feel like they trust the local currency. I mean, look at the fact that Russia recently put a ban on using cryptocurrencies. Why did they do that? You could still hold it and everything. Why did they do that? Because they're afraid that people will start using them as an alternative to the ruble, which the inhabitants of Russia can't trust because it's completely cut off from the international monetary system. So there will continue to be reasons why people use cryptocurrency. Will it get to the point where people will use it instead of the US dollar when you have the opportunity to just use the US dollar and existing transaction mechanisms which have not proven as vulnerable to these massive frauds? Because guess what? They've been tested for decades and decades. I doubt that, right? I think that you have to get to the point where the cryptocurrencies can deliver a better value before people will take on that risk.
Okay, so let's get back to Blitzscaling. So what is the biggest mistake entrepreneurs make when implementing the Blitzscaling methodology?
The biggest mistake they make is treating it as sort of a one-time event. They will say, I've achieved product market fit. And then they think to themselves, and this is what the way it's going to be. Or I have achieved this competitive advantage. And they think, now I'll always have a competitive advantage. Not true, right? As the market changes, as competitors come out, your overall position may change. And you have to remain vigilant. It becomes very easy for an entrepreneur who has seen some early success, who has seen their company grow, sees the valuations rise, thinks of themselves as a paper millionaire or even billionaire, to then get complacent and say, no problem, it's all going to work out. There's no such thing, right? You could always lose it all. Just ask any of the people who invested in something like Celsius at a multi-billion-dollar valuation, or ask any of the people who put their money in Three Arrows Capital or anything like that. These things seem like a sure thing. It felt like, hey, I've made hundreds of millions of dollars. How could I lose it? You can always lose it. So remain vigilant. That's the most important thing for entrepreneurs to keep in mind.
Okay, let's talk about the founder, CEO, CFO, or whatever.
Yeah.
What is the important skill set or mindset that we should take?
So the most important thing is to focus on learning. So here we are, we're in the startup world. It means we're always trying new things. We're trying to do new technologies, we're creating new products, we're focusing on new markets. The key thing is it's always new. And that means that we have to be able to learn new rules. We have to be able to go out there, even if the rules haven't been written down, and figure out how do we win at this game. But the other thing that we have to remember is that the game is always changing as our company grows, as technology evolves, as the market evolves. So not only do you need to, as an entrepreneur, have the ability to learn, you also need to have the ability to unlearn, to let go of the things that allowed you to be successful in the past if they are not going to allow you to be successful in the future.
So the last question, is there any advice for Thai entrepreneurs?
So you have to think in the long term. Thailand is in a wonderful position, as is most of the rest of Southeast Asia. And that is the demographic position. So if we look around the world, we can see places like Europe, or even China, where the demographics are now heavily working against them. The working age population has peaked. There's going to be more and more people supporting an increasingly burdensome welfare state. It's going to be difficult for them to continue to innovate. And it is places where there remains a strong population of young people who are not beholden to the previous ways of doing things that are going to be able to do new and innovative companies and create new and innovative businesses. And the other thing that is really working in favor of companies and countries like Thailand is the fact that the world is becoming more global. So historically, there was a tremendous advantage to companies in the United States or China or India or to some extent Brazil, because these had large domestic markets, and that allowed them to grow to a certain size in a protected environment where other people didn't notice them until they could then expand outwards into the rest of the world. So they got to a larger size and then could go and try to take over other countries. Increasingly, people can actually go global from the beginning. And so that's how a company like Shopify, which is based out of Canada, a country that has, I think only 2/3 the population of California, and far less than 10% the population of the United States, Canada and Shopify are able to ultimately become the dominant platform because they were global from the beginning. And when you look throughout Southeast Asia, there's many companies that began growing and are dominating in that region. Now, the interesting question will become, how will they fare when eventually it becomes a global competition? And that's something that still remains to be seen. It's not easy. We saw, because of language, American companies had this huge advantage just because English is the most widely spoken business language. And that's meant that American companies had an easier time expanding places. But that doesn't mean they've dominated every country because they don't understand the cultural context. So the same thing will work in the opposite direction. Companies from Southeast Asia, from Africa, will eventually grow and look to expand around the world. And in that case, they will have certain advantages because of the ability to reach to the audiences they've worked with. But they will also have to take into account the cultural differences as they expand into the United States and other places like that.
Oh, very helpful. So tell us about your upcoming workshop in Thailand.
So I'm really looking forward to coming to Thailand. Obviously, I'll be speaking about blitzscaling. I'm also going to be working very closely to put on the week after the conference a 2-day workshop in Bangkok. And that's going to focus on how people can apply blitzscaling. It's going to focus on if you're an entrepreneur, if you're working at a large corporation, if you're an investor, how can you apply the principles of blitzscaling? So I think it's going to be on the 30th and 31st of August. And I'm sure we can provide information on where to look in order to sign up for this workshop. But look for the Blitzscaling workshop, August 30th and 31st.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. It's very helpful.
My pleasure, Ken. It was wonderful to be here, and I'm looking forward to hopefully meeting you in person in Bangkok.
Yeah, sure. See you in Bangkok. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.